Hi, in this video we will learn how to create a database view and store procedures within SQL Server. So let's start with SQL Server. Here we see SQL Server, the management studio within SQL Server. Here on the left side you have your databases and your tables, views, store procedures, etc. And here you can write queries, and based on the query you get your results in the bottom here. The first thing you need to do is to create a new database. So you just right click on databases and select new database, and then you need to select a proper name. Back to the basics within this video, which is going to create views and store procedures. So view, what is a view? View is what we call a virtual table, which makes it easier to access data stored in multiple tables. Later we will go through how to create a view and how to use views within SQL Server. Store procedure is a pre-compiled collection of SQL statements. In a store procedure you can use if sentence, declare variables, etc. So store procedure is pretty much like a method in C#. So it's just a piece of code which makes it easier to insert or get data from the database. We have something also called triggers and functions, but that will be topics in a later video. So let's start with the database and the database tables. In this example we are going to create two tables, a book table and a chapter table. So here you see a bigger picture. So the book table consists of a primary key called book ID, and it has two additional columns, book title and summary. The chapter title has a chapter ID as the primary key, and the book ID is a foreign key pointing to the book table. In addition, we have the chapter number column and the chapter title column. So let's create these tables using SQL Server. Now I open SQL Server and the Management Studio, and first we need to create a database. So we just right click here, databases, new database, and then we need to enter the name. In this case we could call it library or something like this. Click OK to save or create the database. And then the library database has been created here. And then next we can create tables. There are different ways to create tables. We can click on tables and create new tables this way, or we can go to database diagram, create new database diagram, and just click on this message. Since we have no tables, there are no tables in this list, so we just close it, and then we can right click, create new table. We start with a book table. The book table has a primary key, book ID. This one could be an integer like this. We have a book title like this. This book title could be a varchar. We just use varchar 50, and then we have a summary like this. Summary could also be a varchar, so we'll use varchar 255 or something like this. And then since the book ID is the primary key, we just select primary key like this. So that's the book table. Also I saved the book table, but first we need to just enter a name for our diagram. So we just call the diagram library like this. And then next we create the chapter table, new table, chapter like this, the primary key, chapter ID, which is an integer, like this. We have the book ID. It should be the foreign key, so this is also an integer. And then we have chapter number. Chapter number could be an integer as well. And we have chapter title, which could be a varchar. Let's use varchar 50. You can save the chapter clicking Ctrl S like this. So now we have 2 chapters, and this chapter ID should be the primary key in this table. And since this should be a foreign key pointing on this book ID, we should create this relationship. So you just click on the primary key here, drag it to the foreign key, and like this. So the book ID, primary key table book ID, and here we select the same like this. Click OK, OK, and the primary key, foreign key relationship has been created like this. We can also set here allow null or not, so the book title should always be filled out, so we can deselect this one. The same here, book ID should always be filled in, and the same in chapter number and chapter title like this. Then we are finished with our tables. We can also create some data within these tables, so let's do that. We can click here on tables, start clicking refresh, and you see our tables has been created here. So let's create some data into these tables, but first we should do one thing. We should set the primary keys to be a so-called identity column. So you just select the primary key here and select in the properties window identity specification is identity, and we select yes here. And then this means we don't need to, when we enter data into these tables, this will be automatically created. Do the same for this primary key, chapter ID, identity specification is identity, yes, like this. So let's start entering some data. We start with the book table, right click on book, edit top 200 rows, and then we can just enter some titles, C# programming, and a summary like this. Another book, Visual Basic programming like this, and a summary like this. So now we have some data into the book table. Let's do the same with the chapter table. So we have book ID 1, 2, which was created automatically. We go to chapter, edit top 200 rows, and now chapter ID will be created automatically. The book ID, we have 2 books. We start with book ID 1, which was C# programming. This has chapter number, let's say 1, chapter title, introduction. It also have a chapter number 2 called C# Basics or something like this. And then for the second book, the Visual Basic book, which was book ID 2, we have chapter 1, which was start using Visual Basic, and then another chapter 2, you could call it functions in Visual Basic or something like this. So now we have 2 chapters in the first book, and we have 2 chapters in the second book like this. Next we should create a view and see how we can use views to get or see the data from these tables. So let's start with With this example, here we have two different tables, and typically we want to get data from both of these tables. In this case, we want to get school name and course name, and these columns are in two different tables. In order to do that, we can create this code. So we use select and the column we want to include from the school table, and then we use an inner join to the course table in order to link these two tables together. So this type of code is the basics for creating view. Here we see a view, an example of a view. So in this case, we create a view called course data, select the columns we want to use, and then we link those together using this inner join syntax. And then when we have created the view and saved it and inserted it into the database, we can use the view like this, select all from course data, and then in this case we get these values, which is a combination of data stored in two different tables. Creating this code from scratch could be a little tricky, so SQL Server, the Management Studio, has a view editor we can use. So we can click on views and select new view, and then we have a graphical interface we can use to select columns, tables, etc., which could be a good start for our view. Typically, we want to store the views we create on like files on our hard drive. In this case, we can use this template. So it's always a good idea to, when you want to create a new view, to use this template. In top here, we just have some code. If the view already exists, we drop it before we create it once more. And here we have a selection of the columns we want to include, and here we have this joining or linking the different tables together. In this video we are going to create a view called get book chapters, which is contain data from these two tables. So let's start this start creating this view using Visual Studio. Then you are back in SQL Server. So here I have the template I was talking about. So we will use this template to create the new view. But in addition, we could use the editor, the view editor within SQL Server. So we click on views, click new view, and then here we can select the tables we want to include in the view. So we need those two tables, click add and close. And the columns we want to have is, in this case, you could need the book ID, book title, summary. You could need chapter number and chapter title like this. And then you see, based on our selection here, some code has been created automatically. So we just copy this code into our template like this. And then we just delete this part and we use this instead. And then the new name of the view should be here, so we call it get book chapters like this. And then we just copy it. Like this. So now we are almost finished with our view. We just make it a little bit nicer, having the columns we want to select on different rows like this. From the book table, and here we have the inner join, like this. And we don't need also this DBO, so we can remove it. I just select DBO, use find and replace, like this, and replace all like this. So now here we create the view, get book chapters. We select these columns from these tables, creating the inner join like this. And here, if the view already exists, we just drop it or delete it before we once more create it. So let's save this view on our file, on our hard drive. So just click Ctrl S and then save it on your hard drive like this. And then we can use the same file name as the name of the view. So get book chapters like this and save. Now our view should be finished, so we can just execute it in order to insert the view into the database. So we click execute, and you see here it was successfully. And then you can go to views here, right click, refresh, and our view was created here. Next, we want to use that view to test it. So let's just create a new query, and then we can select all from and the name of our view like this. Click execute, and you see this view gets the information we needed from these two tables. So we have book tables. So this, from this book we have these two chapters, and from the second book we have these two tables. So that's how we create views, and that's how we're using views in an SQL statement. Next, we want to create some stored procedures. So as I told you earlier, stored procedures is like a method or something, or a function in C#, which is just a piece of SQL code that makes it easier to save data into multiple tables. But we can also use stored procedure to get data from the database. Here we see one example. This example we are creating a stored procedure called student grade, and here we have some input parameters to the stored procedure, and here we have the code within the procedure. So in this case we can use this. So when you have created this stored procedure, we can use the stored procedure like this, just like we create methods and use methods in C#. So execute name of the stored procedure, and then we have the input parameters like this. In this case, this stored procedure create a grade for a specific student in a specific course like this. We use this symbol for both for input parameters and for internal variables like this. Here we see a template, just like for views. It's a little bit difficult to create stored procedure from scratch, so it's a good idea to start with a template. So here in the beginning, if the stored procedure already exists, this piece of code, make sure we drop the procedure before we create the procedure once more. So here we have the name of the stored procedure, and this syntax create procedure, make sure we create the procedure within the database. Here we can have one or more input variables. So we specify input variable and the name of the input variable using this symbol, and then we specify the data type. And then here we have the body of the stored procedure. We can have one or more internal variables, and we can have some SQL code here. In this case, based on the input variable, we can get some get a value inside the internal variable like this, and based on that this information we can insert some data in one or more tables. So let's create in this case 2 examples based on our tables, the book table and the chapter table. We should create 2 store procedure. One store procedure called create book, which just create new books within the book table, and the second store procedure, create chapter, should create chapters for a specific book like this. But let's start with the first procedure, create book. So let's create the store procedure called create book within SQL Server. Just as we did for the view, we open SQL Server and we use our template, which is in this case. So this is our template we are going to use when we are creating our store procedure. So let's start with the name. The store procedure should be called create book. Create book like this. Create book, and here create book. In this case the input variables should be book name and summary. So let's create the input variable book name, and the book name, as you remember, was varchar 50. Then next the summary. Like this. So the summary was also a varchar, in this case varchar 255, like this. And then we want to, in this case we don't need this thing, and we don't need this internal variable, so we can just remove it like this. In this case we just want to have an insert statement into the book table. So insert into the book table, and then here we have the columns. So we have the same columns here. Book title, yeah, so it does, instead of book name we use the book title. So book title and summary like this, and then values, and here come the values, and then we just use these input variables like this, book title and summary like this. So now we should be finished with our store procedure called create book. So let's save it, and we save it here within the same folder, create book, like this. And then next we want to insert this store procedure into the database, so we just click execute, and then it was successfully created. And then you can go to this folder, store procedure, and then you see the create book store procedure has been created. Next we want to test the store procedure, so we just copy the name, create a new query like this, and then we use the execute function, create book, like this, and then we have the input parameters, which was book title, so we can just enter a new book. We can have a book C# for dummies or something. So that's the book title, and then here we have the summary. You just enter some letters like this, and then we can execute in order to use the store procedure in order to create a new book inside the database like this. So you just click execute. Yeah, so now we are ready to test our store procedure. So this is the name of the store procedure, and then this is the book title, this is the summary. So just click execute in order to test it. And then you see, and if you go to the book table, select top 200 rows, and then you see the C# for dummies was created within the database. So now we have created our first store procedure, create book, like this, and it works as expected. Next, we want to create a little bit more complicated store procedure. In this case, create book, create chapter. We will use the book name in order to create new chapters for that specific book. So let's go to SQL Server and create this create chapter store procedure. So we start by creating the name. In this case, create chapter. Like this. Change it here. Change it here. Like this. Create chapter, and this store procedure needed 3 input parameters. The first was book title, which was a varchar 50. Like this, and the next one, just copy this one, was the chapter number. Like this, and this was just an integer. This, and the last input parameter was chapter title. It was a varchar 50, like this, and then next we want to insert data into the chapter table. So insert into the chapter table, and here are the columns, name of the columns. So we have the chapter number, this chapter number, and chapter title, like this, and the values was, so the chapter number, the values here should be, we use this input argument like this, the chapter title like this, and then in this case we also need to have the book ID. So I just include the book ID as well, and then we need to create an internal variable called book ID, like this, and this has a data type integer, like this. So in this case you can delete this one, like this, and then based on the book title we need to find the book ID. So select this book ID. So we get the book ID from the book table like this, based on the book title. Where book title equals the book like this. So here, based on this select statement, since the book title is an input argument, we can use that one to get the book ID for that specific book. And then we use the book ID in this insert statement like this. We also need to have it here like this. And now our store procedure should be finished, so just save it. Click on the save button and save it together with the others like this. Create chapter, save, and then we need to execute it in order to insert that store procedure into the database like this. It was successfully, and then if we right click here, refresh, we see we have these two store procedure. So let's test the create chapter store procedure to see if it works. Then I create a new query, use the execute command and the name of the store procedure, and then so let's see what's happening here. So in the chapter, just right click, edit top 200 rows. Then we have for book ID number 1, which was C# programming. For that specific book, we want to create a new chapter. So that was chapter title, and then the next input parameter was book number, which was just chapter number, which was 3. And then we need to enter a name for that chapter. So let's call it, let's start with some advanced programming or something like this. So now, based on this syntax, we will create this new chapter within this book. So let's see if it works. Yeah, so 1 row is affected. So let's go to the chapter table, right click, edit 200 rows, and then you see, for book number 1, this new chapter was created like this. So that's how we create store procedures, and that's how we use the store procedures in C#. So now we have created 2 store procedure and 1 view. So let's use this view once more. So now we have created some information in the database based on this store procedure, and then let's use the view once more to see all the data in our tables. So select all from the name of the view like this, and then just execute, and then you see we have 2 books. We can also add an order by book title like this, and execute one more. And then you see for this book, C programming, we have 3 chapters, and for this book, Visual Basic Programming, we have those 2 chapters. So that's all for today. Thank you.